Recording will start soon, and it looks like we're recording. So we're just going to call this meeting to order at 7:02. And I think we'll have a pretty quick meeting here in terms of agenda. So the first thing that I want to do is bring up approval of the minutes from our June 3rd, 2020 meeting. Everyone should have those.
Yep.
So moved, if you're looking for a motion.
Seconded. Does anybody need any more time to review them? Okay, we'll take a roll call vote here. So we'll start with Member Mills.
Mills, yes.
Michalowski, yes.
Weeks abstain.
Okay, Lavoy, yes. So it passes. 3 voting affirmatively, and Member Weeks abstaining. When we look at the next item of the agenda, I think it's really, I want to thank everybody first here on this subcommittee. I know, Amy, this might be your last, maybe you'll get written in and maybe you'll rejoin us at full school committee.
Yeah, I didn't do a write-in. I was rolling the dice. So, and it looks like we have 3 write-ins. So I think I'm done.
Oh, well, I want to thank you because you've been I think all 4 members here, to collectively speaking, and I'm speaking for Mary as well, have been a big part of these discussions. So I just want to thank everybody here because as chair of this subcommittee, it's been, I feel like a very productive, good committee. Everybody's had a feeling to kind of express their concerns. And one of the things I would say is, for the most part, I think we've always kind of come to a consensus on things, which to me is big. So thank you, everyone.
I agree. Thank you, Matt.
Having said that, I really appreciate how everybody jumped on. It seems like everybody jumped on putting together the collective feedback for the standards. Barry did a great job of putting that together in a very digestible format. So I don't know if anybody felt that way in terms of like collaborating everything. I felt like this was an opportunity to first discuss if there's anything in the process that we thought went really well, that was different, that could be carried on to the next chair of this subcommittee, whomever that might be, whether it's myself or somebody else, or anything that we think could be added to it. And then from there, I'd like to just open it up to see if Ken had any questions individually, or if we wanted to discuss anything as a subcommittee about those standards.
Yeah, process-wise, it sounds great. Just so you know, when we get to it, I did compile them all in a single document, and I can share them if you want me to when the time comes.
Yeah, that would be great.
If I just, in terms of your first question, if you don't mind, I think that one thing I noticed in the in some of the evaluations that might speak to process, and I don't think this is really necessarily our group's process, but rather perhaps the way the superintendent prepared his report, was a number of comments about kind of how his materials didn't address the indicators. And, you know, part of that, of course, could be the time and the other things in his brain. But I think this group next year is going to have to maybe work with him a little bit more about, you know, I don't know how, but it's just something that came up process-wise, and it wasn't a, you know, he had, you know, if he shared his document with us, there's some limit to how I want to feed back on that document, because, you know, I'm going to be evaluating that document, so I'm not sure if it's always appropriate for me to be giving him substantive feedback on a draft when it's the thing I'm grading. Like, I do that for my students, but I don't know that if it's in this environment, it's really appropriate.
I think of it in a graphic organizer kind of fashion, because in standard 1, I had the same comments through and through, but I also had probably 50% of members not leave any detailed comments for that particular standard, just kind of their ratings, and then moved on. And I would like to also make it easier for members. So I almost think of like, we're evaluating on standard 1A, and just put everything for standard 1A within that graphic organizer box or chart. Standard 1B, everything goes here. And if it fits in multiple standards, you know, when you get to standard 2C, you can write, please see standard 1A and 1B. I think I was able, like, to read between the lines and discern where things would go, but I had the extra time to do so. If I was crunched for time, I don't think I would have read between those lines. And I think, you know, providing that space for the superintendent to really make his thoughts super concrete would be helpful for members.
So I don't, I agree, Megan. I think that there was definitely some stuff there that was hard to find, and I mean, take it for what it's worth, because there's a low likelihood I'll be on this committee next year. But I do think, though, the couple of things that stick out to me, one is we were really clear about asking for evidence of impact, evidence of quality, evidence of feedback. That was like one of the first things we said back in our first meetings last fall, was don't give us a list of things you did. I mean, Megan, at one of our most recent meetings, you said, this isn't the COVID review. Like,
Right.
The world didn't start at March 13th and end. And half the narrative was, and I understand it's impactful, I get it, but I just think that, I think there has to be some accountability for doing what you're asked. I mean, it's not hard. And the rubrics are really clear in terms of, does this and shows evidence of the impact of this. Like, it's not, it's really black and white. The thing I was going to say that I think was challenging, and if I was reading between the lines in some of the feedback, was that, so I remember we kind of consolidated multiple aspects of an indicator into one longer chunk. And I think that gave people a challenge with doing proficient, or, for example, like, there are clear things that might have been proficient, but the last part of it was absent, right? So it made it, I'm not sure there's a ton of added benefit to unpacking those again, because I think the efficiency of the form was really helpful and it made people do it. So I think that that's something the committee should balance, because I mean, I saw it in myself I felt it myself when I was rating certain things. I'm like, well, maybe I could get to proficient here, or maybe I could get to something here, but like, there was something that was the secondary level of the indicator that we had kind of pushed all into one, that I don't think it was ineffective. I think you could explain your rating, but I think that probably caused a little bit of challenge. I agree with Ken in terms of I think that it's the superintendent's responsibility to prepare a narrative that meets the expectation of the committee. And I'm not sure that we want to go, I think we can continue to return the feedback that the narrative is not meeting the expectation of the committee, and then ask him to do better. And at our previous meeting, when we looked at it, I know there wasn't a lot of time to get into details about it, but that was really clear too, to say, this is a decent start, but it's leaving us asking the question of impact, right? So that was my big picture.
But I think your comments about impact, I think you do a really nice job teasing that out. But looking through the comments of most members, it was just a generic, I don't see enough evidence, or just no comments at all. But like, your impact comment is 1,000,000,000% true, and he definitely did not show enough of that. But I don't think the general feel was the impact was missing. It was just, there's just not enough here to let me talk about this in any informed way.
And it may be that what we need to provide him with it's like how you would teach a kid, give him some exemplars, right, of strong narratives from superintendents that are within the same framework or same evaluation system, and show the evidence that we're looking at with regard to, or that you're going to be looking for with regard to impact and efficacy, versus just list of things that happened.
I think that's a really kind of, all three of you made good points, but that's a good summation. I've been jotting down a few things, and I think a couple of things we can think of as, I think to Amy's point, this committee with the superintendent certainly had discussions about evidence and the importance of that. So I think it's probably important, Ken, in some capacity with how you address the narrative, to let it be known that perhaps the lack of impact in his narrative, the focus on COVID versus evidence, could have impacted the overall evaluation. And our feeling is, based upon the comments, that it probably impacted it in a less than positive way, is what I'm hearing. So what I'm thinking from a future perspective is, I think we did a really good job of saying it a few times, like it would be nice if the superintendent had a place on the report every meeting to give evidence. But I think just as a body, it's kind of up to us going forward to keep that as part of the ongoing agenda, because I think the lack of evidence as the year goes on does not always play well when you're trying to provide supporting evidence. And I think we had meetings talking about that. I think the thing that I would say is, for the form that we completed, to me, it would be really impactful if, looking at that form, perhaps there was a spot that showed evidence submitted, or we broke out in those rubrics, here's the example of evidence that shows that this would be proficient versus this. And I think those are kind of jumbled in there and you have to read it. But if we had the ability to kind of tie that form to, these are the pieces of evidence that were submitted that relate to this particular standard, it would drive the superintendent to think about that as the year goes on, like, how am I going to get to this goal? But it would also create that ease of kind of doing evaluation. I think that's a bigger conversation, but I just think
it's a cool concept, but that would take some work.
Yeah, and can I just make a teacher comment from? Do you mind?
Yeah.
It's almost like creating a specific rubric for the evidence that you're looking for. Like, what's the rubric look like for the standard? Like, what in relation to the goal that you've set?
And we
Anyways, just my 2 cents.
No, Mary, that's great, because I like on a building level, I'll give that to teachers, right? Like when they're submitting their evidence, I give them examples of what might be included in each standard, so that they're not just thinking out of nowhere and then come back to me and say, well, you never told me what should go in that. So I have like a checklist made for teachers that they can go off of. They choose what they want, but there's very specific examples in every indicator.
So maybe
and taking it down to my classroom, you know, like, this is what a 1 looks like. This is what a 2 looks like. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Anyways, you know what I'm saying.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
I agree. But I do agree with you. And I totally understand where you're coming from, Mary. But I also think in a bandwidth limited committee where there are really high priorities, and this is the chief officer of our district who is charged with doing this process with people that report to him. Like, we were crystal clear last year. If you're going to run a PLT, get a quick exit survey. Was this helpful to you? Was I impactful to you? How did my leadership impact your experience? And the questions we got were better than what we had gotten the last year, but they didn't answer the essence of what the evaluation looks for, which is, could anybody have come in and run the process, or did the superintendent make a difference in the way that the process ran? And that's the fundamental differentiator between a needs improvement and a proficient and an exemplary superintendent. And we have been, I mean, since the first day I met Daryl on this committee, I said, we need to dig into this. And it's been 2 years of the same stuff. So I appreciate the sentiment. But I mean, when we think of the fish we have to fry as a committee in the next year, I would think the one thing we'd be able to do is say, this is an exemplary superintendent. Here's a model evaluation narrative. Do this next time. And then we as a committee have to say, hold somebody accountable for that. Like, this isn't, I get it, but he's not a kid.
Yeah.
He's the leader of our district. And I think that we're doing ourselves a disservice by doing too much hand-holding through the process.
But I think in one sense or another, he's not getting what we're asking for. And I don't know if it's because like he's rushing it, or like there's 1,000 reasons why, but if he's just not getting it because he's not getting it, then providing either an exemplar or a rubric, you know, this is what we want. And then if it's still not working, then tough luck, right?
And I think part of, we do have some more flexibility next year too, in terms of perhaps how an evaluation, some of the mechanisms that we do have. So to Amy's point of having that impact, that exit survey, it might be something that we can take on as a subcommittee or a committee to help drive some of that. So that's something that we should just be cognizant of for feedback. But I'm going to just kind of, the one thing that I think would be real important, and I think we can take this up in a future discussion, whether it's at full school committee or if it can reflect in the minutes, Megan, that identifying those exemplary superintendents and that the evidence of what that would look like. And I think that bringing that into, we always talk about this committee being a cycle. It's not just, it's a cycle that continues. It's not just a straight line. And I think as this committee reconvenes the next time, whoever is on it can certainly look at that as a solid, my feeling would be, as we identify the goals, approve those goals, that there is a clear understanding of what standards and evidence and the rubric behind those goals actually means at that point, right? And that's really identified of what a successful path to meeting an exemplary or proficient would look like. And that's where I think I'm not saying if we had done that this year, maybe we would have had some more evidence and not having this conversation. I don't know.
Well, not for nothing. I mean, I think we were really explicit. So I don't want us to flay ourselves for not getting what we should have gotten when we had these conversations back in the beginning part of the process and as we processed last year. But I also think that since in the new contract, we've freed ourselves from like tying performance to compensation. And I think that this is an opportunity to really look at if the evaluation process is an opportunity for growth, then I think that this is an opportunity to look at a wider scope and like putting some of those 360-degree elements in so that there can be like, objective, unbiased data collected as part of a baseline that you can then use for growth moving forward. And it can be on the particular topics that you're interested in, kind of pursuing, or maybe as a stepping point from here. But I think that the opportunity is there to pull in meaningful data on performance that we have not been able to get through asking for it as part of the evaluation process.
Just to follow up on two things, if that's okay. One, I agree with people's comments about the fact that this new process is going to give us new insights, but I think it's that we shouldn't underestimate how much work that's going to be. So we should probably start that as soon as possible. Even in terms of framework of what it might look like, because if it could be in place before September, that would be great. So that you could lay out a timeline of when those sort of reviews would take place. A couple of things that we have again talked about doing but didn't see, and again I don't know how much to blame myself or how much to blame central office for this, but we've talked a number of times about having a section of the superintendent's report that included progress towards goals, and since we picked the indicators earlier this year, it would have been nice if in every report that work could have been done. And then I agree that once you get to the end of the year, it's a lot of work to pull together a meaningful document for the superintendent, but if he's been doing that every meeting, then it becomes a heck of a lot easier, right? And it's hard to have that discipline meeting to meeting, but perhaps the next group can do a better job than I did of calling him out and saying, in your report, I noticed that we didn't see this, right? Which I think we really didn't frequently see, something very explicitly and done. And as a corollary to that is that occasionally we would do the answers to questions last time would be in the reports as a heading, and then it would sort of evaporate. So that's maybe not our role, that might be management's role, but the lack of progress in each report, I just think it benefits the superintendent more than anyone else, because
copy and paste it and put it where it needs to go.
That's a great idea, Ken.
Thanks, Ken.
It also allows, I mean, in a situation like COVID was unexpected, but you're probably going to have some different challenges that can face you every year, every few years. It takes into account that, right? If you're continuously talking about progress, a good goal isn't going to be just fixed. It's going to have the ability to be adjusted depending on situations, right? Or achieving it faster, or whatever those are. And I think having that progress. So Ken, I think that's it's something that's probably super important to not only help the superintendent, but it helps everyone else, because when we establish those goals, if they relate to a budget later on, people see progress towards those, and it allows the district to continue to move forward, as opposed to like, oh, let's kind of compile everything we did in the last year. It's like putting your taxes together at the end of the year, not fun.
Fresh in our minds as well, and I think that's another benefit. Like, I remember the homework girl because we worked so hard to get him to like write it well, but the other ones I was like, oh yeah, those were his goals, weren't they? And that's only, and like I remember them well because we worked on them with him, and I doubt other members had those at the forefront of their mind throughout the year. So I think it's a win-win in all ways.
And for exemplars, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'd like to look at things a little like critical, even if it's like myself. And I say, like, maybe, when we talked about the goals being voted on as a full school committee, it was almost like, and I remember I might have even said something like, the next steps are we'll have the semi-evaluation here and then the full evaluation there. And I think looking back at that, it should have probably been the next steps are you can expect in the superintendent's report, and we'll progress towards this. And I think that's just, I'll kind of own that from just how looking back and reflecting on it, that could have set a precedent early that, yeah, we'll get to the halfway mark, but there's going to be check-ins along the way. So you as a superintendent are going to be better prepared at the halfway mark to be able to say where you are.
Yep.
So.
And I think when we move forward too, we want to be careful about exemplars, because I think a lot of committees don't do very much of this work across the Commonwealth. And
there will not even be narratives out there to grab.
Yeah, we just want to make sure that we're not given the exemplars, because
aren't there exemplars from the model? I mean, aren't there model evaluation documents within the rubrics?
Not that I'm aware of. I know there's exemplar standards and what they meet, and we could easily identify those and point that out. This is what exemplar looks like.
Yeah, then maybe it is. Maybe it's not exemplars, and maybe it's just articulating what the data is that you want. But I feel like the work to create a rubric to grade that evidence is not time that we have as a committee. I'm
thinking less of a rubric and more like a chart, like standard.
Right.
Here are the things that you could put in that we are looking for, and then check, like I did that. Like it's less of a rubric and more of a checklist, I suppose.
It's food for thought it's feedback for the next committee. And I think that I hear you on that, Megan. I could see it in that, because the nice thing about the rubric, it says evidence may include, and it gives you examples. So it's not like, oh, check, I did these two. If you have that exact evidence, great. But if you don't, what are you going to submit for evidence? If you don't have evidence, well, you don't have evidence to support, right? So it kind of, and that's what I think we could benefit from visually seeing that, right? And everyone would benefit from that. All right, so if we're okay, I'd like to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the development of the draft composite. And I think we talked about it a little bit in the process, but Ken, did you want to share with us what you had, or did you want to have?
So essentially what I did was I took last year's document. I assume you're seeing my screen. The weird thing about Google is you can't see what you're actually presenting. So this is just essentially, and I assume we must have agreed on doing this last year as the same group, right? So I took that model and put the statement at the beginning, that it summarizes the responses, doesn't reflect every comment, etc. And then I cut and pasted the standards and the indicators, because I think when this is read to the public, whether I do or whether the next chair reads it, that people knowing what the indicator actually was is important for the context of the comments. So I use the same format, although I got to go through with all the colons and that kind of thing and make them similar. I didn't do that work in case you didn't want it this way. in format. So I have the numbers. Also, I'll scroll all the way to the end. I cut and pasted all of the
Graphs again. You did that
circles.
last year.
We did it as an
I remember you
appendix.
put the graphs in last year. Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
really great to have.
And then I went through and pretty much, for the most part, just turned your comments into sentences and chose to call him the superintendent rather than Dr. McCall, just for consistency. Like I think because whoever did number 1 called him the superintendent, so I just kept it that way through the rest of it. And I did choose a pronoun for him, of he and his, and then did the same for, maybe we can go through the details of it, but just in terms of format, it was basically positive, negative is the way most people did it. Yeah. I maybe fleshed out number 4 a little just because some of the other ones were longer. Then I did the same thing. Again, you can't see anything I'm doing now because I'm scrolling so fast. Sorry. I did the same thing for the goals. So I put the progress towards goals. And basically, I just did a brief summary goal by goal of what people said. And then the overall, put the overall comments. And then the sentence here is something I was typing while you guys were talking. Because it seemed to be what people were suggesting. I don't know, Matt, how you want to go through all of this, but maybe we could talk about the global format first, and then specifics. The last sentence too, the one on the screen, the overall rating last year, we made a point about the change from the previous year. I don't think there's as much of a change from the previous year this year. It was kind of the same sort of mixed bag it was last year. I don't know what people think about making that comment again. So I don't know, Matt, how do you want to work? How do you want to go through it?
So I think if we talk about the beginning presentation, it's important, because I think when we look at an overall rating like that, it's nice to be able to perhaps break it down by individual standards to see, because they all come in together to create that one overall rating. So I think it's important, as you mentioned, to kind of go through these. But what would be, I think, important is you look at, for instance, all of these right here, right? That's a pretty mixed bag. Like there's a pretty, right, when you see a proficient 9 needs improvement 10, that's scaling away a little bit more, right? That there's an opportunity there for improvement versus, right? And all of those are. And I always look at, like, I haven't looked at all of the full composite, but I think that when you go through it, it's important to write this, but say, of the overall rating of proficient, this standard might have weighed it down, right? This is an area that has been identified that the superintendent is strong in instructional leadership versus this, right? And I think it's important that we identify that, because when you ultimately write that out, that helps establish forward-thinking goals for next year, right? If there's areas that can be improved greater than other areas.
Well, I hear what you're saying on that. That makes sense.
Can we take a quick glance and see if they're different? Yeah. So in standard 1, it's kind of like more needs improvements, right? Mm-hmm. In standard 2, it's more proficiency, right? So there is, to your point, right? In standard 3, it's more of a mixed bag, right? But still, 8 needs improvement strikes me as a lot, right? Mm-hmm. And then overall for number 4, again, we see 9 needs improvements.
And if you go into standard 4, right? Like, what I noticed on this was you have exemplary 2, proficient 13, needs improvement 4, but when you get down to cultural proficiency, needs improvement 11 and unsatisfactory 2. Like, to me, that's glaring. So I think we have to look at also the areas of biggest, like, variance in that. To me, that if 13 out of 19 people are saying it needs improvement or unsatisfactory, that's a concern.
Yeah. And
are you saying that for targeting goals for next year, or are you saying to draw that out some way specifically in this evaluation?
I think when we looked at the goals for next year, we'd always kind of look at what happened in the previous year and review it. So I think it's important that we call some of those pieces out, because part of us identifying standards were to identify the ones that were most applicable. And if one of the standards is really way off and being met, I would strongly consider putting a goal next year focused on that as well, because that's an area for improvement. That's just that's my 2 cents on it, because if one is the other way, 13 proficient or exemplary and 6 needs improvement, maybe we have to think about a different, maybe that's working well enough that we can tweak that goal.
Yeah, or maybe we move away from that particular, indicator of focus, right?
Exactly.
No, Matt, I think that's, Ken, do you mind adding that in, or is that cumbersome?
So I highlighted this comment here, right? About so should I comment that the superintendent and the future goals committee should go back and examine which particular indicators and show strengths and weaknesses and pay attention to those next year, or do you want me to call them out, like the particular ones?
I'd call them out, actually. I would say, like, pay attention in particular to standard, what we're just looking at the cultural proficiency, right, for whatever 2, and and give them a commendation, right, if there's one that's very, like, he has a lot of highs, and a lot of exemplars and proficients, then we can commend them for that as well. But I think there's a few in there, and I agree with Matt, that are very glaring, that should have particular attention to them.
Yeah, I have a hard time like giving too much of a huzzah, for instance, to say 4D on the screen where there's more proficiency that needs improvement. It's still like a third of the committee who thinks it needs improvement.
But if there is one in there that is, massively
maybe the first one, where you're looking at 15 out of 19 exemplary proficient might be commitment to high standards, and that's a positive thing to say. It sounds good. I can go through and do that if there's ones that seem glaring. If they're 50-50,
exactly.
Just kind of let it go. If it's something that doesn't seem like it fits the overall score.
Like that one right there. If you just scroll down, I'm sorry, you just had one.
11-7 again. I saw that
right there. 14. There was another one I thought 16 proficient. I thought I saw.
Oh yeah, right there.
Yeah.
Like he's an ethical human.
Yeah.
I thought I saw another glaring -1, 2, 1.
Yeah. So it's not just a point, but those are the ones that to me end up being like really they're not concerned, but that should be an area of focus. I mean, if that's what people are feeling and seeing, and maybe that's an opportunity to think about the evidence you're submitting against that too.
Well, since we do have a group together, and I don't want to make this decision on my own, can I just go through and highlight which ones you think I should point out? So it's a group decision. So in standard 1, these are the 3. Do any of those jump out to us as needing special attention?
No, they're all kind of mixed bag. Well, mixed bag-ish.
Yeah, I
think the first one is. I'm always astounded by the one exemplary and then 10 needs improvements. Like I think that speaks to our need to do better training on what the process is supposed to be like, right? I mean, I feel less worried when you cluster between proficient and needs improvement and half and half. Like I think that's like more, but the ones where you have exemplary all the way down, to me, those feel like those need attention either in training or evidence or something.
I think it speaks back to your comments before, Amy, I think it was your comments about how to use a rubric. So, if you can't match everything in one of the areas, you really shouldn't give that rating. And I guess people aren't thinking that way because it's hard to imagine how you would do much of an exemplary if you know. Right. So we think these are all mezza, so not special attention.
I mean, I think that you have a mixed bag is a concern to begin with. That it's pretty much, I think. But I to Amy's point, proficient and needs improvement isn't like.
Can you go up one a little bit, Ken? I just wanted to see that. Oh, so that first one was overall.
Yeah.
Instructional leadership.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if they were like underneath.
No.
It's hard for me to see how you can, I don't want to pick on anyone. I'm sorry if it's one of you all, but I don't see how you can say exemplary in the whole category if you couldn't say exemplary
in anything else. Right. I wonder if that was an error, but you can't.
It is,
so So are you saying in terms of calling out, I mean, I think this was concerning. I had scanned the graphs more than looked at the numbers. And this one was concerning to me because I felt like there was no clear winners and it's instructional leadership, right? I mean, I think the crux of one of the most critical things you do as a superintendent, right, is manage instruction. So I don't know if you have to call it out as something that needs particular attention or just a, concern overall that there is not a stronger feeling of quality in the area of instructional leadership. Like you would hope not to see, we see as many needs improvements or more than proficients in almost every category.
That's
And
right.
that to me is gravely concerning if quality of instruction is the bucket.
Yeah, I can.
I guess I haven't read Ken's comments yet and how he kind of called it all together in the end. So I don't know if there's comments.
Yeah, me neither.
That's the one thing I really didn't do as much of yet. I more summarized people's comments in the overall. I think where I was hoping for some direction here was what we're doing now in terms of like an actual like pull it together kind of statement. So I agree with the group if the group is agreeing that, pointing out that we would hope to see more proficients in this important area is something to put in the overall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you do a nice job putting that all together, Ken, and in a way that's comprehensive.
So for 2, this is one where there was maybe an opportunity, I guess, to have the criticism sandwich, have some bread. It still kind of bothers me that there's more needs improvements for, environment, but I guess we could call out this in particular, even though someone did say unsatisfactory.
I think the first and the last one, I mean, Daryl's overall strength.
That's huge. Like, not only are we looking at exemplary versus a needs improvement, we have exemplary all the way to unsatisfactory. And
right.
I just hope that, all members are just looking at the evidence and not just splattering their opinion like this was Facebook.
Well, no, but I don't. So I think, though, that, I mean, a number of people, not a number, I know that at least one other member in my category said, I'm rating this based off of evidence and my personal experiences with the superintendent, right? I mean, I think that, yes, our charge is to rate on the evidence, but certainly as the, oversight of business and operations, especially finance, I think that is, there's direct relations, correlation to work that you do with the superintendent and your rating. I mean, I think that there's wiggle room. I mean, to me, this speaks to the, the strength that Daryl does have in the district with long history and understanding the needs of the district and being able to, I mean, certainly operational oversight and understanding who we are as a district and what our needs are is certainly an area of strength. And I think that that's worthwhile to point out,
So as D kind of speaks to the overall more than A, I was thinking of calling out D in particular because A is still sort of mezza, right?
Yeah.
And the one at the top is the overall, which feels like it was buoyed up by D rather than A. I don't know.
Yeah.
For 3,
troublesome one, right? Like, look at B. B's pretty low. Oh, never mind. I'm sorry.
I mean, I think communication.
Yeah.
I mean, but again, you go from exemplary to unsatisfactory.
Right. That's an odd one too.
It's again sort of the same mezza everything is.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah. I know. And there was a lot of, I mean, I wrote this one. So this is one certainly where I think there were complaints about lack of evidence that were provided to be able to support higher ratings in this category. Like, this is pretty clear because we were pointed to or partial, right? Like engagement with the community is fine, but with, community-based organizations, or sorry, with like community groups like police, fire, and town managers is great, but with community-based organizations for development. So I think this in mine, I could feel like we might have had more of patterns emerged if we had unpacked the narrative part of the.
So that's one where you might want to break it up a little bit more. You're saying.
Well, no, I mean, we can't now because we couldn't break them up.
In the
It
future.
was where like people couldn't rate, like you might have rated community relationships as unsatisfactory, but business relationships or vice versa, community relationships as great, but business and development relationships as unsatisfactory. So you cut the middle and went with a needs improvement. Like I think that there was a bit of the evidence in this one seems to really impact the overall ratings of proficiency. And there was a lot of like, tries really hard, good intentions. So
That's not good.
I don't know.
And then the fourth one, I think.
What's the exemplary 2, proficient 13?
That is commitment to high standards. And then cultural proficiency, strikes me as noteworthy.
Yep.
I don't know if, part of me has a hard time. There's 15 of 19 that are positive, so I guess one could call that as a positive. Reading this indicator, I imagine I was probably one of the ones that said needs improvement, but I'm happy to point it out.
That was the challenge I had with standard 4, was there were 2 that were kind of on the real needs improvement weighted, and then if you scroll down further, Ken, got 13.6, and then the other one was 8.10. So it's almost like you had 2, which was the cultural proficiency and the shared vision, which are things that we've so to me, it's almost like there's 2 different buckets of conversation here, because that shared vision is something, for as long as I've been on the school committee, that's a continuous concern in the district, the shared vision throughout the district.
Absolutely. And I think that relates right back to the cultural proficiency, right? Like if it's if it's not shared by all, then it's not culturally proficient, right?
Well, they go hand in hand to it. I actually think people were a little they were nicer on this than they were on cultural proficient, but the cultural proficiency, to your point, it's a reflection of the lack of shared vision to a degree.
I think that's something we really need to highlight. I mean, just from my own personal, that's where I rated him the lowest.
And then for me, the commitment to high standards, and I don't really know how to say this because it seems like more my personal opinion. I think he has like a philosophical commitment to high standards, but the rest of them show that the execution of that commitment is lacking.
That's a perfect way to say it.
It is.
Write that down before you forget.
And it's okay. I mean, it's okay for him to recognize that not every leader at every school is going to behave the same way. And it's okay for him to identify exemplary role models to follow that, really embrace that vision or whatever, right? And to that point, that's where it all comes back together in terms of how effective of a leader are you? Do you run meetings where you're identifying that Mr. ABC and Mr. XYZ and Miss KLM, these 3 are going to come here together and talk about things that they're doing at their schools that really reflect this vision, right? And perhaps that's a way that he gets to that point. I was going to say Mr. Jones and Miss Smith and whatever, then I'm like, we probably have one in the district, and then it just goes out the window.
Your alphabet work, Matt. I liked it.
Right.
So I think we've highlighted some things. You see, it's kind of tough to know what to pick because a lot of it's just metza, and to agree, I think that's a problem, right?
Sure.
Where were the goals?
That's okay. So here's the goals. So it's going to put a note to myself here.
See, those are, to me, are pretty concerning.
Wasn't that part of Desi's, the one guidance they gave us? So I rated them some progress because I thought that's what Desi said we were supposed to do.
Yeah, there was an advisory about that, right? About
That's why I went with some progress, because that was what Desi recommended.
But just in terms of the amount that met, to me, that concerns me overall, that you've got one met on district improvement goal. So like, to me, that's pretty concerning.
Well, I think I actually think it was pretty concerning that, there are, half the committee, almost 9 people, that think that the staffing plan was the supposed product of a 10-year plan of action to address enrollment trends. And I'm not sure if that just speaks to our size and the ability for people to stay connected to the critical things that we are trying to focus on, right? Like, I think that you all have done it longer than me. It's just hard. And it's hard to feel like, especially for folks that come in without a lot of school or district-based experience, to really be able to separate like the wheat from the chaff a bit. So they see one thing that was done, like, well, this is great, we're moving forward. And some didn't have the benefit of the previous year's conversations where we've asked for data or explanations or plans. Like, I can't get in anyone's head, but I feel like that it's a part of the broken process of the system, right? For us as a big group, with trying to maintain connection to really important aspects of the work we're doing.
No, I agree completely. And I think, again, if we can put that in every superintendent's report, and if you can provide, very specific evidence. These goals were hard to rate too. Like, there wasn't enough to really move forward.
I guess I look at the thing that concerns me is when I look at the numbers on the screen, you have a total of 8 did not meet and a total of 8 met. And then it's just somewhere in the middle, significant, some progress. And to me, like, there are 2 goals up there that have no mets and a total of 5 did not meet. So I understand that there are impacts from COVID, et cetera, but to me, I think it's important to point out the lack of committee members that said that you met any. Like, there's only, if you go through the first 3 goals, there's only one person that says any of the first 3 were met. That's concerning to me.
Well, and the bully prevention plan was like 2 years late, so that wouldn't have to get met. Like, we had to get that done eventually. Wasn't that supposed to be done a couple years ago?
It was, and I think part of that is I would question whether or not what we hear on the cultural aspects is an impact of not a solid bullying prevention plan, or are people afraid to address it because they won't let it go anywhere? Is there a good outlet for people? Is it really followed that if you see something, you say something, and you're actually listened to, and there's an objective investigation? I don't know if that's happening consistently, but I think as a school committee, that's a bigger conversation. And we've asked the superintendent multiple times for high-level reports on just like, not to know who's who and who did what, but high level in terms of, are we seeing trends in bullying in terms of reported instances?
And that's a 10-second report pullout. Like, you just go into your SIMs, you go into your discipline, and then you can, like, if it's checked bullying by the administrator, you could just say there's X number of instances. Like, that is the world's simplest report to pull.
And to me, that's super important to see, because it's like, if you see that, then you can see how that might be impacting things downstream. Social and emotional learning needs, budgetary needs for this, consistency across the district. I'm sorry, Ken, you were going to say something as well.
I was going to say two things on this goal. One, it wasn't very high bar. It wasn't like that the plan was good or that, or that it was executed. It was just that he would do it, and we still didn't meet it. And I would say too that the data that you're both talking about, I think, are sadly going to underreport what's people are actually experiencing, right? Because as you mentioned, if there's not a culture that, you know, there'll be follow-up, then you're not going to report the next incident, or you're not, even if you're the same person or a different person. If you see, you know, Joe doing something and getting no redress, you're not going to, you know, probably report it and put yourself out there. So those numbers are probably the baseline.
Yeah, I agree about the reporting piece, Ken, in terms of the numbers. And I mean, districts, I think, can, you know, really impact what is getting reported into SIMS through, you know, decisions they're making at the local level. I'm 99% sure I gave him a Met, and I think that was one for me where I was like, you know what, this is where you get a COVID pass, because at least it's done, right? Like, I mean, it was, hopefully it'll be presented to the new committee soon. I mean, seemed like there was a document that was done, you know, so I do think that probably the number of Mets didn't necessarily speak to the quality of the document. I certainly didn't, but I was just happy to have something I could check off as being like in the can.
And there's, you know, I think there's an opportunity just as a committee when we see things like in that district improvement goal too, working with administrative team, educators, and the community in the process. I think it's for us to also make sure that all of that's happening, right? Like whether it doesn't say in the process of update, like it does say it updating an intervention plan, but the process could be getting feedback from the community, right? Does this, or getting feedback from educators, getting feedback from the administrative team. And I don't recall seeing anything that indicated that there was a process and feedback to say that whether that all happened in the process, I wasn't sure of, right? And to me, that's always the best way to kind of test it out. The administrative team is comfortable with this. The educators are comfortable with this. The community, which might entail even the cafeteria workers, the custodians, the people that support schools, the volunteers.
Yep.
Right, because to me, that's, to Ken's point of who's going to report it. It only takes one person who knows that they're empowered to be able to do it, and they're not going to be in a, right, it only takes one person to witness it that could change a kid's experience in school. And that's what, right? And it kills me when I hear, you know, when I get a particular email from a member of the public and I reach out to Dr. McCall and just say, is this being taken care of? I want to make sure, like, I don't want to know the details. I just want to make sure that this person's being addressed. 9 out of 10 times I'll hear, well, the principal at this school is working with them. And more often than not, I'll hear inconsistent experiences. So my question is, how much oversight is administration looking at that to be able to say, here are good models at this school, here are other models, and we can do that? I don't know the answer to that, and I still don't know the answer.
Matt, you bring up a good point, and I think we talked about this like at the beginning of the process this year, and how these goals may be multi-year processes. So now that there's a plan in place, maybe we want to focus next year's goal on its execution. Maybe it's a focus of the PLT. Maybe we ask him to bring, have his administrators bring evidence towards what they're doing to every meeting, and you spend 15 minutes a meeting in order to cover this very important area. Yep. Which would also help him improve on the 2 indicators we spoke about above if this is an ongoing process. So I think this is definitely one of those goals that needs more work. And then we already have specifics in mind of how it could be improved.
Yeah. So it's the execution of it now. It's that consistency across the impact. It's, you know, the successful implementation of it might actually impact the cultural diversity element as well, et cetera, et cetera.
And I think it's also I'm trying to look towards, moments where he can utilize practices that have been effective during COVID. The surveys, while not perfect, people really liked getting them, and people really liked providing their feedback. And so not only to execute the plan, but also to let the public know that there is a plan in place and this is how they can get their voice heard. So for him to continue those emails, I don't think people minded them coming out every couple of weeks. I got a McCall email and I was excited to read it. I loved hearing his update. So with very important things like this and the cultural proficiency that we're asking him to work on, I think this is a place where he continues those methods of communication two-way, right? Because he's getting feedback from us as well.
Yeah.
Okay. And then in the overall, I follow the overall with just summary of the comments. And I have to admit, throughout this document, within the individual standards, some of the comments are repetitive from standard to standard, but I didn't want to edit that because I felt, if members felt that it was relevant to that standard, I didn't want to affect their voice, in the way we structured it. Again, what I didn't really do a lot of at the end was summarize, but I think you all have given me some, I've made marginal comments about things to include to kind of buff up this last paragraph about which particular standards, about goals for next year, about the relationship between the goals. I think that'll make this a little bit of a richer ending than it was right now. In the past, we always had to vote to accept this, calling it some summary because it was related to his contract, which isn't really the case anymore. So I always put the sentence in at least the last few years because I wanted to make sure that the committee was clear that if they voted to accept this document, we were voting to call it proficient so that he got his salary, right? It was just a technical point. I don't know what we think about using the same kind of overall rating this year, if that's necessary or how we want to end.
My feeling is what if we're not basing a decision on salary or anything, I'm not sure if that right, because it's almost like we're dismissing some of those district improvement goals with this last, right? Those are all net progress. So I'd almost be in favor of just wiping out that, right? If you're just going to be the person that skips and reads the last sentence of the book, that does not really summarize what the evaluation is. That's just my personal perspective on it.
I agree, Matt. I like that idea.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I might want to wrap up the last paragraph. I'm going to buff up this paragraph with just, I wouldn't call it proficient overall. I might want to repeat the ratings, and I don't think the ratings seem super proficient if you just repeat them.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean,
you might want to just repeat what you said at the opening of the summation rating or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
I mean, is it appropriate to say? Do you remember how this compared to last year's overall?
I can pull it up. I feel like it was similar. Let me.
Because I wonder if it makes sense as a summary to say, like this is the second year in a row in which the number of proficient and needs improvement and, satisfactory or proficient and needs improvement / unsatisfactory, I guess this year, ratings are, blah, some sort of like sentence about, we hope that this is a, I don't know.
That's
Not repeat itself. I feel
Well,
like if you can make a connection to the two of them, because I think it's notable that, last year we made the point to note that it had decreased per the previous year. It has not rebounded.
Yeah, I'm gonna cut and paste that. I got how we ended this last year. So this is, I'm gonna highlight this just because this is not this year's stuff. So we were 11 proficient, 5 needs improvement last year. The trend is not going in a good direction.
Right, and I think we need to state that the number of proficient has not improved, the number of needs improvement has increased.
And there's an unsatisfactory. I mean, that's, you
Right.
know.
That's huge.
Mhm.
Is the high, moderate, low similar, Ken? Can you scroll up a little? I can't quite see that.
Impact on student learning. I'll cut and paste it so it's all on the same
So that's
screen.
actually,
That's worse too,
Yeah.
right?
I think
Right.
it is. By a
Yeah.
lot. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a little COVID
Agreed.
gap on that one, I think, but I think it's important to state very pointedly.
High has gone down, moderate has gone up, and low has gone up. That's big.
I'm not sure that we can presume that there's a COVID impact. Like, I don't want to over presume impact of coronavirus on ratings unless it was explicitly stated. I mean, I think that there's a lot of reasons why someone might have rated as moderate versus high. And I want to just make sure we read the comments really carefully to see if that was in fact the case before we put that out there.
Because, you know, one could argue that he had more opportunity this year to show an impact on student learning.
Right.
And then it's kind of, I don't want to put that thoughts into the committee's mind, and then the fact that the ratings were lower is kind of not awesome.
Or that people were being a little gentler, knowing that we had coronavirus out there. We were doing the best we can. Like, I mean, that's when we start to presume what people were thinking when they came to their
You can also
ratings.
state it point commentary, like here is 2019 and here is 2020.
I mean, I think that it's best to almost represent these as a percentage too, because when I was just looking at it, right, like you look at the overall summary last year of proficient and needs improvement, 11 out of 16 is like 68.75% or whatever. And you look at this year's 11 out of 19, you're down to like 58, high 58% or so. Like he's dropped 10%. Like that's a big drop of year to year. Like that.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Because people will just say, well, it's still 11 people say it, same 11, right? But you're dropping pretty hard. You're going from 68% to 58. I don't know, Ken, if you teach, and Megan, you teach, and Amy, you're part of school, but last I checked, you don't want to be getting 58. 68s you don't want to be getting either, but 58s you definitely don't want to be getting.
Between your teacher ABC and XYZ and that, Matt, you're on fire tonight.
There you go.
I definitely think we should comment on the trend. I do want to be one little devil's advocate thing here is that people might have felt more free to say needs improvement this year because they knew it didn't affect the contract, which is part of the reason we wanted to get it out of the contract. That's also hard to say if that's really true or not. Hopefully people would have followed the rubric one way or the other, but I do think we should note the trend, you know, because it seems it's unequivocally getting worse from year to year to year.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is one of the things that's been asked for in the committee. Are there any metrics that we might be, or key performance indicators that we can look at that might indicate how the district's performing outside of your standard, you know, MCAS results and that type of data? And I think this is impactful because we have to think as a subcommittee, we've really kind of formalized this over the last few years, and these are good baselines and metrics to kind of see how are we trending, and we certainly want to see that trend go the other way, not downward trend.
Absolutely, because if he was presenting the MCAS data to us and it had that downward trend, like there would be a huge pause. So
not that he did.
Right. My thought is this, Megan, is that the things we see here might not reflect on the MCAS for a couple of years, like, right? If we,
it's a trickle up or down. I don't know. It's a trickle effect of one sort. That's not it.
Right. There's a cause and effect to it, right? And we're going to try to address where we can improve. So,
no, I agree.
I think that's a good way to summarize it, Ken, because then we get, and Amy, thank you for bringing that up, because I think we get in the habit then of every year of perhaps writing a narrative that gives some sort of comparative analysis between the trend, how things are trending, even though this is summation of 1 year, it bleeds into the next year as well.
Yeah, I mean, and you can go back a couple of years if you want, but I do think that, related to the fact that this was, lower than the previous year, right? And I mean, you have last year 15 proficient and 4 needs improvement. So you were at 79% proficient, right?
From 2 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, right, from 2 years prior. So there's definitely, I mean, your 3-year average, like your 3-year trend now is showing that's a 20% difference in 3 years, in 2 years rather.
And that's kind of why I was inclined to show all 3 years, because I think that does show a trend. And it's sort of the 3 years where we've had this system.
Yep.
I think the year before that, the number of evaluations was pretty low. So.
Yeah, 3 years is better than 2, right? I mean, to show it.
And then next year, if it's better, we continue to show how that trend rebounded,
Yeah, you want to do right.
It's also good for history for it to be in the most recent document because, sometimes those things are lost.
And at the end of the day, it's good for the superintendent and leadership, as Amy's point as CEO, to reflect on those things and say, what is causing that? What can I do as leader to impact those, to change that, right? And to me, that's where the output of an evaluation should always be. What did I do really good, but what can I continue to improve? Because
that's the purpose, right? And that's his charge. And I think by including all that data, it's also going to give us a really nice starting point at the beginning of the year to push that, and to also help form what we want that over the summer, perhaps what we want that 360-degree feedback to focus on, right? And this gives us those points, those jumping off points to start forming what that looks like.
This has been a good meeting, good discussion.
Always is, Matt. We're a good little team.
We're the A team.
Yeah, you.
You're guys gonna be the A- team next year without me, but it'll be okay. Aww. Maybe we'll come and I'll sit with Mary and we can just chuckle and pass notes back and forth.
You'll always be welcome as a member of the public at any public.
I know. I was joking with my husband when I saw that last person was writing in and Holden, and I was, because I just assumed we wouldn't write in all the seats. I'm like, I'll just do that. I didn't know that I had the bandwidth to do, or the mental fortitude really, to do 3 years. And I was like, I could be that person that I'll be like, just showing up at the meetings and talking about stuff.
And you said that Mary is going to be chuckling at this meeting next year after a year of being president. I don't know if Mary's going to. I hope she'll still be capable of chuckling. It's going to be a tough year for her.
That is true, actually.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Chuckling.
Mary will be fine. She does yoga in the morning to decompress from all the stress, right, Mary?
Every morning, an hour and a half.
Oh, that is
Keeps me centered.
That's a lot of yoga.
That is a lot of yoga.
Well, it is.
Good job,
some
Mary.
of it's movement and some of it's meditation. Thank you.
No, that's
I hope to bring.
That's a big commitment.
It's habit. It's habit now. Anyways.
That's how it changes, right?
But, yeah, I'm really sad. I'm sad to see the trend.
I know.
Mm-hmm.
But I also.
So, Mary, I think, do you plan on attending these committee meetings next year? Is that something that will change, or?
I will sit down with the new board, because there'll be 3 new members on the executive board and 3 returning members on the executive board for the WREA. And we'll sit down, and I may or may not be assigned to this meeting, but I have a feeling I'll be more in the business, finance, and actual school committee meetings. But I have all the background knowledge for this meeting, so it might be good to stay here.
And keep in mind that with next year, that we as a school committee have a little more flexibility in terms of how we obtain feedback from different stakeholders in this evaluation process. So just keep that in mind. That I think I can't speak for what this subcommittee will deliberate, but my suspicion is that there'll be a conversation on the most effective ways to get that feedback from different stakeholders. So I look forward to seeing what that brings out in the process.
Yeah.
So Ken, you're on mute, Ken.
I think I have a general sense of direction for people, you know, of comments that I can add. You know, I think the other things I'd already written were mostly just edited versions of your summaries. So I think they are the committee's words, whether we agree with them or not. But I appreciate the feedback on how we can give some more summative value to some of that. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of comments that repeat each other. So I think I can use that direction to craft a final version over the course of the week.
Cool.
When should
Do
I
you need any other help proofing or taking a read through when you're done? Do you want any of us to do that for you?
What do you think, Matt? It could only be one of you at most, right?
True.
So
Yeah.
Well,
I think it's helpful to do so, just even
Yeah.
for spelling grammatical things that might just slip your eye.
Yeah. I don't want to say that Amy could not do it, but I don't know, like, technically.
No, I probably shouldn't because I think I'm officially done once they count the votes. So
I think tonight is officially.
peace out, people.
I think this is like the Amy Michalowski going away party. Like,
I will miss you.
Mic drop at the end of this one.
Yeah. Well,
Right. I asked Ken if he wanted help because I knew I wouldn't be able to do it.
I'll use my English teacher hat if you need me to.
myself or Megan, I think, can help. I don't want to volunteer Amy. I don't know what that would mean at that point. I don't know.
I'm perfectly content not to help.
Matt, I'll take out my red pen. I'll do it.
Okay. You okay with that, Ken?
sure, that's fine. I probably won't get to it tonight because I've got work to do to get ready for tomorrow, but at some point in the middle of the week, I'll get it to you.
Okay.
All right. Well, I just want to thank everyone again. Thank you, Amy. I mean, this was a subcommittee that was started with 5 members and 1 member never showed up for any. So, and we never missed a meeting due to quorum. So kudos to the
Yeah.
18.
Yeah.
That's right.
So,
All right.
all right. So I do have to move to the next item on the agenda, which is new business. Any new business? Bye, Amy.
Bye.
Amy, don't be a stranger. We expect
I'll
you
really be around. I'm keeping my finger on the pulse of what's happening, so don't worry.
Good.
And one of your kids is going to watch you sit, right? So that's.
No, Leah's still there, actually. She's going to email
Okay.
Bill because I don't think that they were able to have an election. And she would definitely come back to do the school committee again. She's just a junior.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
yeah.
So she would come back. I don't know what they're going to do about filling student seats because I don't think they had any.
Because I got
stuff like that at the
This
end
is
of the
maybe
year.
not this topic, but I did get a letter appointing 2 of them. So I don't know how
Oh, you
that came
did?
to be about. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, there you go.
Oh,
Maybe
anyway.
he has picked.
Ah,
Yeah, she didn't really care one way or the other. It interfered with her volleyball schedule, but she was like, "Oh, I think I got kicked off." I was like, "Oh, okay."
well, here's hoping that there's volleyball and soccer and everything. next year.
Everything in between.
Yeah.
That's right.
Amy, you want to make the final motion?
I
Yeah.
move to dismiss, adjourn, whatever.
I
Adjourn.
get your final motion right.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Please note that that was made by Amy Michalowski.
Perfect. All right.
I'm a minutes aficionado now. All right. Mills,
Sounds
second.
good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mills, yes.
Oh, Michalowski, yeah. We have to vote.
Lavoy, yes.
All right.
All right.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Take
Bye,
care.
guys.
Yeah,
Bye
see you
now.
later.
Hi, everybody.
So Matt, you're recording. You can stop recording, I guess, and then you can just share the link with Rebecca.
Yep, I'm going to stop right now.